Well, Gen Z is fighting mad again. Surprise, surprise. This time over new Starbucks uniforms. Well, that is the real story. That is what they're upset about this time. Starbucks' new dress code will require baristas to wear certain colors with a green apron. Trauma.
How did that make you feel?
I know my truth.
Excuse me?
I know my truth.
Trauma. There's a dress code at work. Gen Z Starbucks baristas revolt over BS new dress code. Starbucks entitled Gen Z workers revolt after being told they can't wear sweatpants. Per Starbucks, starting on May 12th, baristas must wear a solid black top. It can be crew neck, collared, button up, whatever. Their bottoms must be a shade of black, khaki, or blue denim. Starbucks says, quote, "This is to create a warm, welcoming environment that invites customers in, showcases our great coffee, and provides a comfortable place to sit and stay." Starbucks calls its baristas, quote, "green apron retail partners," and says since 1987, the green apron has been the symbol of Starbucks Coffee Company, representing the hundreds of thousands of retail partners.
Our baristas are ready. The world's best beans are ready.
But there's Gen Z backlash. We're talking about Gen Z. These are people that were born between 97 and 2012. So figure out how old that would make them. One of the Starbucks union's Instagram accounts called the new dress code policy regressive.
We, the partners, are informing you that writing messages on cups and implementing drab uniforms will not restore Starbucks' slumping sales or increase customer satisfaction.
Really? Regressive. They're saying you got to dress for work. You don't have to wear a tie. You don't have to wear a tux. You don't have to wear even a dress. You just have to wear a shirt and some pants. An angry Gen Z barista says, quote, "We're just expected to lie down and accept it." Video Starbucks union workers in Seattle marching in response to the new dress code. They're marching over this dress code. Oh my God, the horror of it all. The clip was captioned, "Starbucks workers across the country are facing understaffing, inaccessible benefits, discrimination, and low wages." Well, is that the problem, or is it you got to wear a black shirt? Instead of fixing these issues, Starbucks decided to introduce an unpopular, more conservative dress code. Well, not a surprise, Gen Z has been slammed in the media for workplace behavior and performance. Look, here's the deal. There's been so much about this. I've done several shows about this, saying that these Gen Zers are entitled. 625 U.S. hiring managers asked which generation was most challenging to work with. Half of them said Gen Z, 45%. ResumeBuilder.com surveyed 1,344 managers and business leaders about Gen Z employees, and 74% said they found these young employees more difficult to work with than their older colleagues. Half said they found it difficult to work with Gen Z all or most of the time. And 50% of Gen Z hiring managers even admitted that their own generation was hard to work with. Now, this Gen Z CEO has said she is hugely successful after doing some of her best work on her laptop in bed. A new Gen Z workplace trend called coffee badging is where employees clock into work, get coffee, show their face, got to be seen, and then go home and finish their work at home for the rest of the day. 20% of Gen Zers bring their parents to job interviews. Seriously. Is there a place where my mom could sit? I thought you were here to interview for a job. Yeah, I am, but is there a place for my mom to sit? I brought my mom. Now, look, it's easy to pick on Gen Z, but in fairness, they do have some unique challenges, and I'm going to talk about this. They have the poorest mental health of any generation. Only 19% of Gen Zs, 18 to 26, consider themselves very happy. Nearly 1 in 5 Gen Z high school students have seriously considered suicide. They're not happy people. COVID isolation hit Gen Z especially hard because there was a complete lack of social connectedness. They felt isolated. They felt on their own, and they weren't happy being by themselves. 73% reported feeling alone sometimes or always, and loneliness can really be damaging to your health, for example. I mean, not just your mental health, but to your health overall. They're also living in a time that's marked by rapidly rising inflation, which means they're being told you're not going to do as well as your parents. You're not going to be able to buy a home. You're not going to be able to afford a mortgage. You're going to have a lower standard of living than your parents for the first time ever. Because before, each generation did better than the last, and they're being told you're the first ones that aren't going to get there. Who wants to be told that? In 2024, Gen Z had an average of $22,950 in student loan. Now, they do have many positive traits. They represent the most racially and ethnically diverse generation. They're very entrepreneurial, depending on how you define entrepreneurial. 62% indicate that they have started or intend to start their own business. Now, I suspect if you break that down, there's a lot more that intend to start than have started. I don't think they should have lumped that together, but they did. They're caring. 70% of Gen Zers around the world say they're involved in a social or political cause. They're pragmatic. They dream of personal career fulfillment. But they do expect economic struggles because we've scared them to death. We've said, you're not going to be as well off as your parents, like I said. They do want to come by community. They want a supportive, everybody is included community. They do have a strong sense of personal expression. So those are some good things. But here's the deal. They are bringing pathology to work. I said they are the least mentally, emotionally adjusted generation we've ever had. And you're hearing their employers say they're the least easy to work with because they're bringing all that to work with them. So here's the question. Do you bend your organization to their mental, emotional needs, or do you require them to get better? And what seems to be happening is they are expecting organizations to bend to their pathology. I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm lonely, so you need to bend the organization to nurture me where I am, which is mentally, emotionally unhealthy. Now, if we do that, is this not a race to the bottom? Should we not be saying, get therapy, get healthy, get better? Look, this is what I do. I'm not saying you need to ignore that. You shouldn't ignore that. For God's sakes, don't ignore that. We need to meet them where they are. We need to help them with what they need, but not by nurturing their pathology, not by bending the job to a low common denominator of functionality. If you hire everyone that's depressed and you bend the organization to function at a level of depressed workforce, you'll never survive. You need to help them, require them, get them to not be depressed, not be anxious, not feel lonely. They need to up their mental emotional game. So you have a well-adjusted workforce. Look, if you're traumatized by having to wear a black shirt and gray pants, you're too sensitive. You're too thin-skinned. Are those the real issues? I don't think so. You shouldn't be traumatized by a dress code. If that's your problem, you need to work somewhere else. But I got a sneaking suspicion they're going to kind of want you to dress a certain way too, because everybody has a signature look or feel. You go to an office, they expect you to wear, I don't know, office wear. Everybody has a certain expectation, and you're going to have to go along with it. Everybody says, if I have to work from the office, I'll quit. Okay, then quit. But we're going to have people that show up. There are going to be expectations. That's why it's called a job. If you don't have stress or pressure at your job, you don't have a real job. If you don't have expectations, you don't have a real job. Now, if they're too controlling, if they don't care, if they're exploitive, and reasonable people agree with that, then get another job, but it's going to have expectations too. You just have to decide. But I don't think you're going to have a sip in or a sit in or march around enough to get them to kowtow to what seems to be a pretty reasonable expectation set. I could be wrong, but I think you're going to find out that's the real story. Wherever you're getting the real story, make sure you subscribe and follow. I'll see you tomorrow. Despite some post-election optimism, Wall Street is already bracing for a rough rest of 2025. When Warren Buffett starts dumping blue chip stocks and stacking up cash, you've got to ask yourself, what does he see coming? I trust Preserve Gold to safeguard my accounts, and I urge you to do the same. They're the only precious metals company I recommend. When uncertainty is this high, smart people look for stability. That's why physical gold and silver might just be what your finances need. Text Dr. Phil to 50505 to get your free precious metals guide from Preserve Gold. With gold prices recently breaking records and analysts predicting this trend to continue through 2025, you cannot afford to wait. As a bonus, you can get up to $15,000 with a qualified purchase from Preserve Gold. So don't wait. Text Dr. Phil, that's DRPHIL, to 50505 today.